Hi everyone, Dr. Dan Lawrence here. So this video, hopefully fairly brief, will be to give you a very broad overview of some of the key shifts that occur as we transition from ancient Greek rhetoric to ancient Roman rhetoric. And it's really an impossible task, right? Because you're talking about thousands, literally thousands of years of human history, from the founding of ancient Rome to the rise and expansion, through the rise and expansion of ancient Rome, to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and then after the Western Roman Empire falls, another 1,000 years of Eastern Roman history with eventually the walls of Constantinople come crashing down after the seat of the Roman Empire is shifted to Constantinople, which then ushers in a whole new era. It's in part can be attributed to advancements in military technology and engineering, with giant cannons that finally are able to break down the walls of Constantinople, which fundamentally shifts the way that city states are organized, changes warfare. And then, I mean, there's other really important cultural, intellectual things happening too. With Williams touches on this very interestingly. With the fall of Constantinople, you have scholars who then flood into Europe, bringing their Aristotle and bringing their ancient Greek texts with them, and then kind of helping to spur on the Renaissance, which then, Enlightenment, scientific revolution, industrial revolution, it almost brings us up to the present day, right? So through thinking about ancient Greek and ancient Roman history, you kind of paint the picture of, I mean, this is reductive, right? This is of Williams, and this is Western, the kind of canonical Western view of history. So there's a narrowness to thinking about history in that way. But nonetheless, you can kind of see this trajectory from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, who then inspires the ancient Roman thinkers, Cicero, Quintilian. Augustine marks the kind of end of that classical tradition, the shift to placing the locus of truth in God, the rise of Christianity. This is Williams places Augustine at the kind of capstone, the end of the classical period. And then, fast forward through your dark ages, and eventually you get the return of ancient Greek classical philosophy and rhetoric. And this creates a new renaissance in Europe as those texts are revisited and revised. And then you have this new kind of, this intellectual cultural resurgence that, and there's many material, economic, and social and cultural reasons for all of this, right? That we don't have time to like peel back all the layers of that onion, but you get a kind of broad picture from Williams of that trajectory. So what are the fundamental shifts, right? Well, you can see it already moving from Plato to Aristotle, right? So Plato, we'll see this image. Raphael really captures this beautifully, perfectly, um, in this fresco with the School of Athens, right? I'll have this picture in Canvas so you can look at it next to this video. So you see Plato with the hand up, and Aristotle depicted with the hand down toward the earth. And that's your fundamental, that's the nutshell, the difference between Plato and Aristotle, right? Plato is looking for truth out in the, you saw this in Phaedrus, in the place beyond, the colorless place beyond the heavens, where the chariot goes to the very edge of the universe. And those are the ideals, right? That's the concept of the circle. You nowhere in physical material reality do you see a perfect circle. Nonetheless, we can imagine the perfect circle. So Plato says it must be somewhere out there is the pure idea, the pure ideal, the concept of that perfect circle. So Plato is metaphysical, right? He believes that truth is somewhere out in the realm, in some place not in this shadow world that we live in. It's Plato in a very reduced nutshell, but that's why Raphael depicts Plato with the hand up towards the beyond, the metaphysical, the world that we cannot see. It's beyond our grasp and beyond our touch. Aristotle is this like scientific materialist, is kind of the first empiricist in some ways. Not the very first, but the first very extensive, such a large body of work and so many different disciplines, biology and zoology and rhetoric and ethics and everything. And but the hand is down, Raphael, because Aristotle is principally concerned with observation and the material world. And it's the Roman rhetoricians who principally are inspired by Aristotle. Now, it's not so simple as that, right? Because you see Cicero telling us how important Plato is to his work. But I think when you read Cicero, you're going to see he's kind of skirting around the edge of Plato, and Cicero is really writing and thinking more like an Aristotelian. Because what does Cicero do? Cicero creates that system of invention and memory and arrangement and style and delivery, the five canons of rhetoric. Isn't that a kind of Aristotelian system? It's a framework. It's a heuristic for trying to understand rhetoric, right? It's not that you can be both a Platonist and an Aristotelian simultaneously. Maybe that's what Cicero's trying to do. It's, that's the fun scholarly debate of all of this, is trying to figure it out. And scholars still kind of disagree on these things. But nonetheless, isn't Cicero really acting like a kind of Aristotelian, a systematizer, a technical rhetorician in some ways? By offering us the canons of rhetoric, isn't Cicero in some ways looking more like a sophist, which is precisely the type of rhetoric that Plato was reacting against, that Socrates was reacting against via Plato? And historically, the figure of Socrates resisting and reacting against the sophists who were doing what? The sophists were teachers for hire, training people to become effective speakers, but not teaching any ethics, not teaching any philosophy, not teaching about the right things to argue about. That's Plato's whole gripe. That's Plato's whole problem. That's why we have the Phaedrus, where Plato tries to align rhetoric with truth and says you must first seek the truth and then be a rhetorician. You first have to be a thinker, then you can be a speaker, then you can be a writer. You have to ascertain the truth first. So with the Roman rhetoricians, we kind of get a return to something that looks like sophistic rhetoric in a way. It's more technical, it's systematized, it's skirting around Plato in some ways, skirting around ethics. And I'll let you discover the nuance of that on your own, but go to Quintilian then. Quintilian kind of revives this nature versus nurture argument. How much can you teach a person to be a great speaker or writer, and how much is it just intrinsic talent or natural ability or something? And that's still something that we struggle with as have entire disciplines of education that tease out those problems in the science of education and study of it. Quintilian does a lot of things, though. Quintilian also expands the field of rhetoric in so many important ways. Say, Quintilian tells us, isn't money also persuasive, right? And isn't the mere look of a person persuasive? The clothing you wear and how you present yourself in front of an audience. And sure, right? I mean, we know this very well as writers, because the cover of a book can sell a book. The content might be meh. It might not be anything that particularly, but the cover of a book can go a long way to sell it. the mere look of something can be persuasive. So Quintilian doesn't develop a system for what we would call non-discursive or non-textual, non-language based. That's Jody Murray, um, who writes about non-discursive rhetoric, but Quintilian hints at it. Quintilian hints, even in one of his hypothetical legal cases, talks about the persuasiveness of music. So Quintilian is really thinking a little bit more broadly about rhetoric for the first time, beyond just that oral tradition, which is how, as contemporary rhetoricians, we understand rhetoric. We understand that humans can be persuaded along a number of different domains. And if you don't believe that, just look at an advertisement. It has moving image and text, and it has ethos, pathos, logos, and it has a music bed, and there's so many different modes going on in these multimedia advertisements that can be really, really persuasive and really, really effective. Okay, so let me recap maybe and cut myself off here before I go too long. I wanted to create this video because I know it's such a broad, we're looking at such broad expanses of time, and it's kind of difficult to wrap our heads around it. And Williams gives you a really useful overview of these shifts and these changes. But basically, this is the history of rhetoric. You have the sophists, who are teachers for hire, and that arises out of a necessity. George Kennedy tells you about this in the reading you did. Ancient Athenians must defend themselves in a court of law. It's really useful, it's vital, it's necessary for them to be great speakers. Socrates, and via Plato, reacts against that, says no, it's there's more to it than just developing compelling arguments. You have to philosophize, you have to know what to speak about, you have to think about the truth, you have to bring truth to rhetoric. Aristotle views rhetoric as a kind of neutral art, and then also develops some systems, the different branches of rhetoric, your ethos, pathos, logos, talking about audience, kind of gives us that starting point for our heuristics, for our framework, for in a way it is a technical. It's there's Aristotle is like the return to a very early nascent return to the sophism, the sophistry, and then the ancient Romans do a little bit of nuance in terms of they want to produce rhetoricians that are in service to the empire. You really see that in Cicero and Quintilian. They're concerned with rhetoric as a kind of teaching and training to produce good Romans, right? Good Romans who will be good speakers and good people, who will be in service to the empire, and teach them and train them, and especially with Quintilian, and teach them and train them and bring them up so that they're good little cogs in the machine of this massive expanding ancient Roman Empire. And in doing that, they skirt around both Plato and Aristotle, right? The ancient Romans are adapting. They're adapting the gods, they're adapting the customs, they're adapting the intellectual tradition of the ancient Greeks, and never really offer a new philosophy, a new philosopher. That's what we miss. That we don't see that in the ancient Romans. There's no grand new idea that comes out of ancient Rome, but nonetheless you have some very bright thinkers who are contending with ancient Greek ideas and trying to adapt them and fit them to their own purposes. And in that way you get this almost return to a technical, sophistic kind of rhetoric. Now that's it for now, but of course I've lost a lot of complexity and nuance in trying to distill this down. So make sure you read your text, make sure you read your Williams, make sure you read your primary sources, your Cicero, your Quintilian, everything. Augustine then as that cap at the end of the classical period, and that gives you this kind of sweeping arc across a pretty long span of time there, from about 700 years from Socrates to Augustine. So the world has changed from that across that time period. And then, of course, if you look even further to the very fall of the Roman Empire, another 1,000 years is a very long, sweeping expanse of time, but gives us a lot of insight into human history, human intellectual development, and where we are today as well. Okay, good luck.